Well, greetings. This is John Meakin with another webcast for tomorrow's world. It won't have escaped your attention that across much of the United States this winter, we've seen record cold temperatures and record amounts of snow, especially in the Atlantic Northeast. Last time I checked, it was well over 8 feet and counting in Boston, and even the Niagara Falls have partly frozen over. Record cold and snowfall are also being reported elsewhere around the world. Yet conversely, so is lack of rainfall, producing severe droughts even within the United States, a subject that was dealt with very thoroughly in a recent webcast by one of our presenters. Now this begs some important questions. What is happening with our weather? And why have recent winters been so unusually cold and snowy? Some weather experts are now telling us that the Earth is actually cooling rather than warming, as we are so often told through the media by those who base their conclusions on computer climate modelling. Average temperatures have not risen at all during the 21st century and have recently started to decline, reversing all of the warming that has been supposedly caused by the inexorable rise of carbon dioxide. This cooling is confirmed by the most accurate NASA satellite observations. So in the webcast today, I would like to address the potential impact of a cooling Earth on our weather and on us. There have been times in history when the world was very much colder than now. Even as recently as 1645, just before the nation of America was formed, as part of what is known as the Little Ice Age, the world saw a 70-year plunge in temperatures, which was followed by a less severe 40-year period of colder climate between about 1793 and 1830, just prior to the Victorian era in Britain. These historic periods of colder temperatures closely match lower levels of solar activity as signalled by a marked drop in the number of sunspots observed during those years. It is now known that the sun functions according to several different cycles, one of which is an 11-year cycle. Today's sun appears to have entered a period of these cooling cycles, very similar to those of the mini ice age. The number of sunspots and other signs of solar activity have already diminished sharply. This has led expert observers to conclude that the sun is headed for an extended period of lower activity that could last 20 to 30 years or more. This means the world will become progressively colder. We may well see widespread lower temperatures than we have experienced in over 200 years. But does any of this really matter, and is there any reason to be concerned? Well, as discussed in that recent webcast I referred to earlier, God is ultimately the one who controls our weather. He created those cycles of the sun that so powerfully dominate our climate, and he can use them to bring about his purposes. In the book of Revelation, we read about the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, who ride at the cusp of the day of the Lord, the time of God's dramatic intervention in world events to save mankind from utter destruction. The combined impact of these 4 horsemen, representing false religion, wars, famine and disease, will result in the death of 1/4 of humanity. Well, what possible scenario or catalyst could precipitate death on such an unimaginable scale? After all, this means up to 2 billion deaths based on current population figures. Well, there's one scenario that's staring us in the face: our rapid descent into a much colder and more extreme climate. It's not the only scenario, because others are mentioned, but a much colder world holds the power to seriously disrupt modern life in ways our generation has never experienced. It is simply inescapable that in a much colder climate we won't be able to produce as much food, and the food we do grow will become much more expensive. Growing seasons will be shorter, crops will fail, famines will set in. People and nations will fight to get the food and other resources they lack. As populations get weaker, disease epidemics will set in and millions will die. Did you know that around 70 countries today depend on food imports to feed their people? What do they do when their food is no longer available, or at a price they can't afford? Without that food, their people must adapt or die. It has happened before. I am not saying that it's got to be a cooling world that brings about this revelation scenario. After all, God can accomplish his will in any way he decides. But the very much colder world we are already entering is a very good fit and would seem to tick all the boxes relating to famine, which is inextricably linked to the state of the weather. For a more detailed look at the issues surrounding the influence of the sun on our climate, please also refer to our March-April 2010 article entitled Here Comes the Sun. And finally, you might wish to check out our booklet, Who Controls the Weather?, which places this whole subject into its ultimate perspective. You'll find all this material at tomorrowsworld.org, along with videos and all kinds of other material on biblical and news topics. You can also visit us on Facebook to access the same information. So thank you for watching. See you next time.